That looks good, I hope. Just give me a second to set up and we will be on our way. So just sorry for the, I think I'm a little bit behind, but not by too much. So I hope you can forgive me. Just give me 1 second here and we will be good to go with respect to this film, Faces. So just let me just set up my computer here. I hope you're doing well. Greetings from Tokyo, by the way. This is Daisuke. Oops. And I'm having trouble with my computer. But that is okay. There we go. Because I need to access the chat. I need to be able to see what's going on. There we go. If not, I'm not able to look at the live chat. So that's what yes, here we go. Yes, I'm now at the live chat. So, and let's see. So great. So I shall put this here and then we shall be on our way. So, okay. And I think I'll leave this somewhere. Maybe I'll leave it in the background. Maybe I'll put it here just so it can be seen. Although it might fall off in mid-live stream, so I don't want that to happen. So I'll just leave it somewhere around here. Maybe I might refer to it later. Who knows? I might not. But anyway, my friends, sorry for the slight lateness. Oh, you can see this. Oh, well, I don't think that matters. I have to finish going through the supplements here, but that's a completely different story. But sorry about that. My friends, greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke, and I apologize for the slight delay. I think it's now 6:01 Tokyo time by my, it's now 6:02. So I'm 2 minutes over, so I apologize, but I hope you can forgive me. And if the sound is bad, please let me know. I have my usual microphone connected. And here we go. So let us commence with this conversation between you and me with respect to the film from 1968, which was written and directed by the great John Cassavetes, and this is the film Faces. Now, this was the result of a poll that was conducted by me, where I asked viewers to vote for one of 5 films that they wanted to have discussed. And this was, it was a close poll, but in the end, this came up on top. And so I'm very excited about this because this is my first opportunity to discuss with you in a little bit of detail about a John Cassavetes work. I have spoken about, I think, Shadows it was, in passing, but I haven't been able to talk directly about any work by John Cassavetes with any degree of specificity. So this is very exciting for me, and also I'm a little bit nervous. So because John Cassavetes' works, I think, have a very, how should I put it? They were the works for me. I'm speaking overall here in terms of his works. They were the works for me that I must admit I found them to be quite perplexing and odd when I first was exposed to them at a age that is younger than my age right now. So I was a student, maybe 17, 18, 19, somewhere around that vicinity, where I first started to try to dive into the works of John Cassavetes because I was I had access to them for the first time, and I saw as many films as I could by him at the time, and I must admit that they were a little bit difficult for me to appreciate at that age, at my, where my mind was at that particular age. And but I think among those works, even at an early age, when I first saw Faces, which is this film right here, I was overwhelmed. I thought it was very captivating, and it was very it, it it was very moving in some places. It was very absorbing, and also it was quite shocking and a bit abrasive in other places. But I think that was meant to be, and hopefully I can get into its abrasive nature in a second, in terms of its narrative and its style, its filmmaking style. So this was the film that I think, even at a young age, I felt a certain connection to. I must admit I didn't understand fully its implications, because, as you know, it has a lot to do with a couple, a married couple that is it's not a young couple per se. In other words, it's not a couple in their 20s or 30s or 40s. I'm not sure. Maybe they're sort of in a midlife stage, as it were, and so it wasn't necessarily something that I could relate to at the time that I first saw it, which was, I was a young student, I was a teenage student, I was not married, I didn't have any wife or kids or anything like that. So I didn't have that connection, if you will, of the characters and the stages that they were they are at the time of this film, and many of them are sort of looking back and trying to, in many ways, trying to rekindle something of the past that isn't now in the present, which is also something that I'd like to try to talk about later today. So in many ways, it shouldn't have been a film that worked for me when I was very young, but I think there was something quite, I'm not sure, maybe innately personal, perhaps, in the sense it was like at its basest sense, I think it was about trying to, in some ways, a kind of communication between people, between men and women, and between men and men, and also between women and women, perhaps, not perhaps, but definitely. So and I love that relationship between and among people. So I think that was the base foundational focal point for me to get at this film at an early age. And then as I grew older, I think I was more and more captivated by it as I too grew in age, and also in my own life experience and my own relationship experiences and marriage and the likes. And so it became something that I felt I could connect with more and more. Now I'm I'm 40 now, and I'm married, and so I don't know if I have I don't admit, or I admit that I don't have a full appreciation and comprehension of, I think, what this film is trying to get at. There are a lot of things, many things that are quite unknown to me, and maybe, hopefully, I can bring them up and you can help me with those. But still, I think I'm in a slightly better place now than I was maybe when I was younger, in trying to get a better grip on this film. And that's something that I'll try to maybe allude to during the course of this Livestream Film Club chat. So welcome to a discussion of John Cassavetes' Faces. Now, I should say at the outset, as I normally do, that I am, this is open to anyone who is a fan or who wants to talk about Faces. And you can very easily talk about this work Faces in the Livestream Film Club live chat, which is ongoing right now. And hopefully throughout the course of this maybe next hour or so, I can address some of the comments, some of the comments that are made in the live chat. So that is very important to me. So, but please note just a couple things. That first, I will only be addressing comments that have a direct connection with the work Faces. If you have any maybe non-Faces related comments or questions to make to me, I'm very appreciative. Of course, thank you very much for taking the time to do so. It's just unfortunately I don't have the time at the moment, at this particular point in time, to address those. I want to devote this time to Faces, and so I will just very politely just ignore those comments for now, but please feel free to leave them maybe in the comment section in another video or something like that. I'm always very open to those. So, but please understand that I will be focusing only on Faces. And with that, also I should say that I don't necessarily plan to go into any detail as far as any other works by John Cassavetes. This isn't meant to be an overview or a journey through the entire filmography of John Cassavetes. So I'm not going to be talking about any other works by John Cassavetes. If you're, of course, if you want to speak amongst each other about any topic like that, you're welcome to do so, but I will probably stay away from those, again, because I want to focus on this film. Although there are aspects of this film that tie in quite naturally, of course, to the other works of John Cassavetes. So there might be some slight allusion or reference to other works, although I don't mean to make any deep or any detailed reference that would, for instance, spoil another film, which is what I want to avoid doing. So this is a live stream discussion focusing only on Faces. And this will be talking about the entirety of the film, which means I will be talking about what happens maybe at the end of the film, etc. So if you haven't seen the film, you should not watch this live stream, because I will be talking about details, and it might be spoiling the film for you, and it might be a little bit difficult to keep up, because I will be relying primarily on specific aspects of the film that only come up after that are relevant to those who have seen the film. So I don't want to talk about generalities here, and so it would be, I think, maybe helpful to see the film first, and then you can come back to this live stream. This live stream will be up as a video once it's over, so you can always come back to it, and if after the fact you can, if you want to ask me a question, if I'm able to answer it, of course. I'm not a film scholar or expert, or I don't claim to have any kind of expertise when it comes to this film. I only know this film through the Criterion Collection and through my own personal experiences watching the film, and my general understanding of how this film fits in, and the context of John Cassavetes' filmography and his professional director filmmaking life, of course. But apart from that, I'm not an expert at this at all, so I don't claim to be able to answer all the questions about this film that could arise. But I will do my best if I am able to. So you can always come back to this video, and then you can ask me questions after the fact. Lastly, and this is also very important, I will be relying on the Criterion version of this, which is the 130-minute version of Faces. Now, I understand that there were, over the course of its history, many cuts of it. For instance, I don't think it's been, I'm not sure if it's ever been made available. It could have been, I'm not sure, but there was a cut that was over 3 hours long. That was first premiered, when it was first premiered in, I think it was Toronto. It was first premiered in Toronto and Montreal, according to the Criterion documentary, according to Al Rubin. But I understand that the cut that was presented in Toronto was over 3 hours, and so and it's interesting too. If you have the Criterion release of this, you can actually see I think it's a 15-minute plus alternate opening sequence, which is purported to be the sequence that was used for that Toronto cut, which is a very interesting way of juxtaposing different juxtaposition of scenes that are in the current 130-minute cut. Plus, there's some extra stuff that I don't think we get in the 130-minute cut. For instance, there's some stuff in the bar, in the what is it, the Losers Club bar at the beginning there with Freddie and Richard or Dickie and Jeannie, right? And also there's some stuff with the ladies, Maria and Louise and that group, I think. And so there's a lot of stuff going, and also there's a different juxtaposition of scenes. And so I think the Criterion cut does, or not, sorry, the Criterion release does provide a little bit of insight as to what could have been, or what was included as part of the opening, at least for the cut that was shown in Toronto. But with that in mind, this is the 130-minute cut, and it is very specific in terms of its presentation of scenes. And to give an example, there is a scene in the 130-minute cut, which is a very intimate moment between Dickie and Maria Forsts, right? And they're in bed, and it's like white sheets, and it's very close shots, and it's the scene where he's he's just laughing, and they're just laughing a lot, and he's giving all those jokes, which are kind of corny jokes, but they're both laughing, and it goes on for a sort of extended moment of time, and it's kind of a fresh, bubbly feel of intimacy between these two characters. And then all of a sudden the tone changes because it's Maria who hints at the fact that she's not really into this. She's not really into Dickie, and she turns, and he turns away, and there are looks on their faces which reveal a kind of maybe malaise in their relationship, and also a kind of I'm not sure if it's the beginnings of, but it's certainly evidence of some kind of breakdown in the relationship between these two people. Well, as you remember, that scene occurs in a certain sequence in the 130-minute cut. It occurs after after Dickie comes home, and Dickie comes home from after having spent not the night, but he was with Freddie, and they were having fun with Jeannie at her house. And then he comes home, and then he sees Maria, and then they have a little discussion. Right? She wants him to take her to the Bergman movie, and he's all kind of jokey, and he's a little bit drunk, right? But he's all riled up, and they have a nice rapport at first, but then it turns a little bit sour, and we get the hint that they haven't had kind of physical, intimate, sexual relations, right? They haven't had sex in some time, or that's the implication, which has been, I think, a very frustrating thing to Dickie on the one hand, and we're not sure at that point why Maria, or why the relationship is such, although there might be a deeper sense as to how Maria feels about Dickie, which I think is revealed later in the film, of course. But my point here is that the scene that comes after they have a little bit of a tiff, he storms off into another part of the house, right? And then he goes into the room with the pool table, and he's about to play pool, or he picks up a pool cue. And then suddenly, in the 130-minute Criterion cut, right, suddenly it cuts to the scene with the two of them in bed, and they're laughing, and it's the two of them together, and they're just having a nice swell time. Why did the man throw the clock out the window, right? Because he wanted to see time flying. Hardy, hardy, har, right? That sort of thing, right? So it was it's that scene of the two of them, right, having, and then she's having to hear his corny jokes, and she's laughing and he's laughing, but then suddenly it turns sour, right? That scene happens at that juncture in the 130-minute cut, while in the opening alternate sequence that is available as a supplement to the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, which is purported to be the opening of the 3 hour plus Toronto, the cut that was shown in Toronto, that shot, that is the start of the film. So you can see, I think, there are certain differences that create implications, which I think are quite profound, and which suggests to me that the 3 hour plus cut of the film probably was more linear in terms of the way it was presenting information, whereas the 130-minute Criterion cut, which we have here, isn't linear. I mean, for the most part it is, but that segment, if you agree with my interpretation, that segment is not chronologically what comes after, right? Because that is meant to be a kind of flashback, if you will, or maybe it's Dickey recalling what happened, or maybe it was something. But in any event, it cuts the chronology because it then goes right back to the Dickey in the pool room, and then he goes down, and then that's the scene, the famous scene where she's laughing, Burley's laughing, and she says, "I'm sorry," at the same time that he comes in and says, I want a divorce," and so, which I'll get to in a second, which that is critical scene. But my point is that the Criterion cut does present information in its own way, and it presents it in a way that I think is very significant, and I do want to talk to you about that. So I will be relying 100% on the Criterion cut, and I don't have, unfortunately, any expertise in any other versions of the film. So if you are coming to this with a knowledge and expectation of another version of the film other than the 130-minute cut, then my comments might be disappointing to you, or they might not necessarily land with you. And so for that, I have to apologize in advance. But once again, I am going to be relying on the 130-minute cut of the film. Okay, so with all that out of the way, my friends, I'm sorry for the long-winded introduction here, but excuse me while I just open my water because my throat is a little bit dry. Excuse me. And while I do that, before I jump into the film in earnest, let me just say hello to everyone who's in the chat. So, Jared, hello. Julio, hello. Great. Rob, hello. It's nice to see you. JR62, great to see you. Cinema Dave Media, it's great to see you. I hope you're well. Steve, hello. Kevin, hello. It's nice to see you. And Paula, hello. Let's see. Dion, hello. Maybe is this the first time, Dion, maybe that you and I are speaking? If it's not, I apologize. My memory is not so good, so I might be misremembering, but maybe this is the first time we're speaking. So if so, greetings from Tokyo. It's nice to meet you. Carl, hello. Wolfgratz, hello. Let's see. Yes, Julio says, when I first watched the film Faces, I thought it was amateurish. Then I realized how good the film is after understanding it more. That's a very interesting comment. That's a comment that I think I might be able to apply to my own reaction to many of the works by John Cassavetes. And so, I feel a little bit, not to suggest that your approach is in any way disparaging or incorrect, and I respect your approach very much so, but for me personally, I always found that I was a little bit embarrassed by my initial reaction to John Cassavetes' films, and I was I think that's a very interesting take, and I think I wouldn't be unhappy, or I wouldn't be angry if maybe, for instance, anyone in the chat here came and made the comment saying, "Oh, I don't like this. For instance, I don't like Faces. I think it's amateurish. I think now it's amateurish." I think that is a great approach to have, because I must admit, right? Its style is very difficult to get through. There are moments of it that really just test my patience, and I really mean that. And sometimes I think, I don't. I mean, I follow the characters, but I think its ruggedness and its graininess, and it's rough sound in many of the places, and it's a very interesting thing if you want to hear about for instance, the story of how the sound was put together and the whole the chaos and the rigmarole that the filmmakers had to go through, right? Because they found out after, you find this out in the Criterion Collection documentary from 2004, I think it is. It's really great. Al Rubin talks about how they shot all the film, and then they realized that all the footage, because it's shot. It's not like now where you shoot it on, let's say, a video camera or iPhone or anything. I mean, you have to use 60 millimeter film cameras that record film, and also you have to record sound on a kind of separate sort of apparatus, if you will. But what happened was that apparently, according to Al Rubin in the Criterion Collection documentary, they had all the footage shot, but the sound was out of sync. And so in terms of putting all that together, I mean, technically, it's very, if you have a track that's out of sync with the image, what happens is you have to, if there's no way to fix that in post by some kind of lab, then in theory, your only possibility is to have to shoot the entire footage over again, which is a frightening prospect. And so what they ended up doing was, and because that wasn't financially feasible, right? So according to Al Rubin, they took the soundtrack, and they actually had to manipulate that and cut that and edit that to match what you're seeing on the screen. And so that accounts for the fact that once in a while you might see moments where the sound might be a little bit off. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's integrated fully with the image. But that's the reason why, at least according to Al Rubin. And so that actually doesn't speak to amateurishness. It actually speaks to the opposite. It speaks to a very finely honed craft in dealing with a very potentially fatal issue, and dealing with it in a very artistic way, which is going to the very heart of the tape and just editing it together to try to fit the image as best as possible. I think that's great. So, but it does have an amateurish feel. I do understand that, but there is an artisan craftsmanship to this film, I think, which is really great. I mean, and going to the documentary for a second, I recommend it strongly because you can really get a sense from these people who loved and cared for John Cassavetes, who worked with him. Jenna Rollins and Al Rubin and Seymour Cassell, of course, but they talk about how he would be up at night just trying to edit these certain scenes, and he'd always know what, like for instance, he knew that there was a shot of Dorothy Gulliver as Florence, right, as Flo, who is the one of the ladies who is. She's kind of drunk, and I come home from the Whiskey A Go Go, and then she has certain affections, if you will, for Chet, right? So, but John Cassavetes, according to documentaries, that he knew that there was a certain shot of her coming around the corner or something like that, and meeting Chet, and everyone else said, I don't know where it is. I don't know. But he knew it was somewhere in all of the film cans of all the footage that they assembled. He knew it was somewhere around there, so he would try to look for it, and as best as he could. It was just going through hours and hours and hours and hours of footage, but the point is that he knew and he lived and breathed the film, and he loved to. And Jenna Rollins, I loved what she said about John Cassavetes. She said he loved to feel the film in his hands, and just to work with it. And so, and he was, and also he was never. He never closed himself off to listening to others. Al Rubin remarks one day about how John Cassavetes had given one reel to one person to edit, and another reel to another person to edit, and another reel to another person to edit, and then all the stuff was assembled, and he showed it to Al Rubin, and Al Rubin saw it, and he said, "Oh, this is terrible." And so what they decided to do was Al Rubin came from New York. He left his family behind in New York, came to California, lived with John Cassavetes for about a year, according to Al Rubin, and then just edited the film with him. And so it's amazing to think of the dedication and the craft that went into the making of this. And so I think, and you know, I look at the film and I see, right, it does feel a bit amateurish and a bit distant. I also learned that there were no boom mics. Right? There were no boom mics because the actors were free to use the space as they saw fit, and so there were no marks on the floor. There was no anything like that. So that meant that they had to free themselves up, which meant two things. They couldn't use boom mics, so they had to use what do you call it? Those portable microphones or recording equipment. So everyone had, according to the documentary anyway, they had these recorders that were affixed to them. So therefore, you lost a little bit of quality in terms of the quality of sound, but you gained, or you made up for it in terms of the freedom of movement that it afforded the actors. This also meant that the camera had to not only follow all the actors instinctively, right? Because maybe the actors would never do the same thing twice. So you could never have necessarily the same camera movement at a different take, for instance. So the cameraman had to have a certain instinct for the flow of the scene, and had to know instinctually when to move from one character to the other and back to the other, when to zoom in or zoom out or something like that. Also, what this meant, according to the documentary, was that the camera had to keep all the characters in focus, right? Because when you have a camera that's in one position and you have its subject moving in space in front of the camera, the lens has to be focused, otherwise the image will lose focus, right? This is what's called, I think, was it focus pulling? I think that's the phrase. But the point is that the lens has to adjust, or the camera has to be adjusted to account for the moving image in order to keep that image in focus in the final product. So that can take quite a bit of technical maneuvering on the part of the operators of the camera. And so if you have this movement, which is not only continual, but also in many ways made up on the spot, if you will, that can account for a little bit of lack of focus in some areas. But I think there is almost a pioneering aspect to that approach. It's a very charming approach, and also it does almost in a way add an interesting element of, I guess maybe, I don't know, almost like a cinema verite style, which is even augmented further by the use of the grainy 16mm black and white footage type of stuff. And so, and then the echoed noise and the soundtrack, which is echoed. It's not a direct dialogue, but it feels like it's recorded on the spot, as it will. So I know it's not true for the entirety of the film. I know there are aspects that are post-dub or have that post-recorded effect. And I know that there are certain tricks of the camera that are that are not cinema verite. Before I forget, I should, there's the scene with, what's his name? Jim McCarthy. Val Avery plays Jim McCarthy, and then Joe Jackson? Was it Joe Jackson? And they're with Jeannie and Stella, the two women in the house. You know, the idea, the implication being that these are two gentlemen who have come home with these two ladies, and it's probably their profession, the ladies' profession, to entertain these gentlemen, right? So, but there's a shot, if you remember, of it's Joe and Stella, and they're talking to the camera, and the camera's moving through the room, and Stella is then talking to the camera, and then it goes to the Val Avery character who's sitting down, and he's looking at the camera, so it's like the camera is a POV perspective from someone. We don't know who it is until we realize in the same shot, there's no cut. In the same shot, suddenly from the side, we see, I think it's Jeannie emerge. And then once she emerges onto the screen, the perspective, the POV perspective changes to a sort of the omniscient perspective, not omniscient, but the objective perspective, if you will, because then the value of your character then turns his attention to Genie. So therefore, the POV suddenly transforms into a non-POV. So that, right, the fact that a POV is used or employed itself is suggestive of anything but cinema verite, right? There are, and then also I alluded to earlier, the use of a flashback after Dickie and Maria, when Dickie returns home, they have a little bit of a tiff, and he goes up into the room and he's going to shoot pool. Right? And it cuts to the shot of the two of them in bed, which is, I think, we're meant to understand is a flashback. And so I think there are these little tricks that betray a sense of cinema verite, if cinema verite was indeed the intent of the filmmakers. But I think my point is that on the one hand, you have this feeling of amateurishness or catching things as they are occurring, because it does have that almost impromptu improvisational feel that is even more highlighted by the cinema stylistic techniques of the sound and the camera and the focus, etc. But we should remember that you have these elements of the camera movement and the way in which shots are edited together, which suggest anything but. Also, we have to remember that there's a lot of craftsmanship that went behind trying to put this thing together. Also, and this is something I haven't mentioned yet, we have to remember too that this was a scripted work. According to Jenna Rollins and Seymour Cassell, and there was a script, right? And they followed the script. There were, of course, moments where the script was changed, according to Jenna Rollins. Lynn Carlin, right? There would be times when he would rewrite scripts or scenes and then expect the actors to memorize them, at least according to Lynn Carlin, as she recalls very fondly with a smile. And then there were moments where there were certain moments of improvisation that were captured on film, according to Jenna Rollins. But then you have to remember that there was a script, and according to Seymour Cassell, right, who plays Chet, according to him, it was all scripted except for certain moments of his character where he was singing, because they couldn't get the rights to certain songs, so he was just singing just things on the spot, so there was a lot of planning that went into the story and the story making of this film, at least according to the players. And so if that is true, and I have no reason to think otherwise, then what we're dealing with here is a film that I think it transcends any view that I might have otherwise had of it that saw the film as amateurish or just sloppy or kind of just a haphazardly put together thing. Right? Just the facts of those alone have to suggest to me anyway the fact that there is something more going on here. And with that basis, I think I can go forward and maybe look at this in a manner that maybe with more attention and care and excitement on my part anyway, as the film viewer of this film. So if you have more interest in this, I strongly suggest as a starting point going to the documentary. Hearing these people talk about the craft is just overwhelming. Al Rubin also has a great commentary on a separate supplement about the lighting and how things were set up. It's great. I mean, there's a story that he told about how he had to figure out a way to light what was it? It was the Whiskey A Go-Go scene where all the ladies go and there's dancing. That's where they meet Chet, and it's filled. It's electrifying, right? Because it's an actual like nightclub. But apparently, what it was that John Cassavetes and they just basically invited all their friends and anyone they knew to come and just shoot that sequence, which I think took place maybe over, according to the documentary, like one night or so. But according to Al Rubin, I think it's what Don or Seymour Cassell. I forget who said it, but Don Siegel apparently is somewhere in that scene. But there was a wait, what was that? Was it that or the Losers Club scene? I forget. But it was one of those huge sets, as it were, and. Because there are two of those sequences in the film, right? There's a Losers Club sequence, or there's like a nightclub sequence there, and there's another dance hall nightclub sequence in the film as well. And then you have, if you're thinking about it in terms of technical terms, you have to think about lighting and stuff. Well, watch the documentary and listen to the commentary of the separate supplement by Al Rubin about how he figured out ways of lighting those scenes. They are so heartwarming in terms of stories about how these filmmakers got out of somewhat technically difficult situations, and you'll listen to those stories and it'll really warm your heart. Really great. But anyway, I don't want to spoil those. I want to save those surprises for you. So please check out the supplements if you can. Okay, so thank you, Liu, for inspiring that response. And I want to stress also that I don't suggest that you think it's amateurish, because you say, Julio, you say, right? You say, when I first watched, I thought it was amateurish. I felt the same way as you. Then I realized how good the film is after understanding it more. Yes, I feel the exact same way. So thank you. Cheers. Bravo, my friend. Giovanni, greetings. Hello. Jared says this was quite a film. So Jared, I think you had mentioned maybe in a comment yesterday or the day before that you hadn't seen it yet, so this was your first time seeing it, if I remember correctly. And you said, I think it is quite good. Might have to watch it again in the near future, as it was an interesting experience. Great. I'm very glad to hear that. Paula says, I must admit I found this a very difficult watch. Yes, this is a great comment, Paula. Nothing to worry about, and if you or others, you didn't like the film, that is fine as well. Don't feel ashamed or embarrassed or scared to say so. Anyone who doesn't like the film, you say it, and you can let me know. I'm very, very happy for that, because, you know, as I say, this is a very difficult film in many respects. It's quite tough, and I mean tough by just getting into. And and I think a lot of that has to do, or at least a good section of that has to do with its technical presentation. And it's hopefully, as far as its technical stuff, hopefully that I've made a few comments that maybe might help. I'm not sure, but any comments I have are probably better explained by the actual direct participants in the Criterion supplements, as well as other primary source materials. But there are other parts of the film that I think are difficult in terms of its narrative, which hopefully I'll get into in a second. But let's see. Galaxy Tides, hello. Jaguar 1964. Finally managed to catch a live stream. Greetings from South Carolina. Well, hello. It's nice to see you. I hope you're well. Wolfgratz, our dear friend, says, I've only watched it once on my BFI copy, and to be honest, I'm not a big fan of Cassavetes. That's completely fine, my friend. Thank you very much. In fact, I'm so far from being a fan that I'm the one I tend to prefer, maybe Too Late Blues. Okay, not a good sign. Well, Too Late Blues, I think I understand its role, its position in the filmography of John Cassavetes. I don't want to go into too much detail because this is Faces, of course, but I understand completely what you're saying by that comment, Wolfgratz. And actually, there are a lot of things that I could say about Too Late Blues, but I'm not sure. Maybe in another video, who knows? But My Cinematic Self, hello, nice to see you. Nazarene Prod. Okay, so you can watch this video after you see the film. Great, no problem. It'll be up, and hopefully it won't go anywhere. So I'm not going to delete it. So unless I say something really stupid, but no, even if I say something stupid, I won't delete the video. So because I've said many stupid things in the past and I haven't deleted those videos yet. So Heirloom Providence, hello, I hope you're well, my friend. And Dallas Star 3, I hope I got that right. I think this is the first time. I don't recognize your name, so if this is the first time we're talking, hello. Good day to you, Daisuke. Good day to you too. I literally received my Cassavetes box set in the mail today. Congratulations. So you're talking about this set? That's great. So it's the Blu-ray set, I assume. And yes, so I mentioned this in my earlier video on the preliminary comments of Faces, that this if you want to get the Blu-ray physical media from Criterion, I think your only option is to get this set. But I mean, I say your only option. It is a bit expensive, I must admit, but you're getting a lot of great stuff. A lot of great stuff. Well, I should take this. I mean, if you like Cassavetes, then you'll love this box set. If you maybe are having difficulty with Cassavetes, but you're on the fence and you know that with more time and exploration, you'll begin to love Cassavetes, you'll love this box set. If you don't like Cassavetes, you will never like Cassavetes, this box set is probably not for you. But it's a tough thing, you know. So, I mean, it's a great set because I was probably I liked Cassavetes' works, or I was maybe a little bit on the fence on others, and then I got the set and I got more into this, and then there's a Constant Forge and all that, and I think from there I really began to better appreciate his works. And I think a lot of it had to do, and I must admit, there's a lot of it here, but I think a lot of it had to do with being able to see the love and affection and care and awe and inspiration that I saw whenever I saw Jenna Rollins talk about John Cassavetes in the supplements here. There was something about her. It's a frankness and it's an openness that I find very just almost awe-inspiring. And the same is true for Seymour Cassell too. I mean, if you look at him, excuse me, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. What was I saying? Oh, so yes, if you look at him and his reaction at the very end of the documentary in Faces, or documentary on the making of Faces in the Criterion Collection, if that's not going to move you, I don't know what will. And I think the opportunity to see an Al Rubin and to see these people who work directly with Cassavetes and talk about him. Of course, I know that the documentaries, I know that a lot of these making of documentaries are meant to be a little bit of I mean, they might not necessarily be overly critical. I completely get that, but there is a certain there is an undeniable loveliness, if you will, in the way that General Rollins speaks about John Cassavetes. And I think a lot of that really turned me, or at least helped me to just better see just how much of an artist and a craftsman John Cassavetes was, because of the people around him and the way they thought about him. So this box set is very fundamentally important for me in terms of my own film studies journey, if you will. So Dallas Star 3, well done on the box set, and I hope you enjoy it, my friend. JR62 says, I found this film very annoying. Do people act like this? I don't know any, thank God. Unlikable characters, but that's just me, not my cup of tea. JR62, this is a great, I will take this comment and I will expand on my own feelings on the characters, if you don't mind. So this is a great comment to make, so thank you for this. Yes, these characters are really annoying. I mean, I don't think they're annoying all the time, but they are annoying, and they can be unlikable. Let's take an example, but I think there's a way in which to look at this. Let's just take an example. I think it's important to be as specific as possible here. Let's take the character of Richard Forst, right? Dickie Forst. Now, played by John Marley, right? And he's married to Maria Forst, played by Lynn Carlin, and his storyline is that he goes. This is basically the film it takes place over, I think, one night, or maybe a 12 to, that's not 24 hours, but it's a less than 24-hour span, I think, with a little bit of a flashback there. We're not quite sure when the flashback took place, but it's the flashback between the two of them, Maria and Dickie. And already we get a sense of who these people are. We see Dickie at the very outset, maybe in an office setting when they go into the projection booth and they're talking. We are meant to understand that this is part of his work, right? So he's a little bit strict and stern, but then after the credits roll, or after the word faces comes up and we go into the bar and we see a beautiful shot of Jeannie turning her head, right, and looking at us, the camera almost. She's looking at Dickie, I think, but she's looking at us as well. This is the tail end of Dickie and Freddie's little night on the town, as it were. And I think Christina Crawford actually is somewhere in that scene. You get a better sense of Christina Crawford's presence in the alternate opening sequence. It's rather truncated here in the 130-minute Criterion sequence, but the so already, right, my point is that at the very after the credits roll, or after the opening title card, already they've been drinking. And so you're dealing with characters that have been drinking a little bit. And so and also when they go back to Jeannie's house, so Freddie and Dickie go back to Jeannie's house. So it's the two men and the one woman. So already you have an interesting dynamic, right? Because I'm sure both of them are thinking about some kind of, maybe they're sexually attracted to her, physically attracted to her in some way, but we're not quite sure what the dynamic is. And already we're getting a sense of what it is, because there might be a little bit of sexual jealousy or kind of competitiveness between the two men. And this is seen, I think, very appropriately and very astutely during the bit when they're dancing around, and after Jeannie has changed, she's gone off and she's come back and changed, and immediately Freddie goes up to her and they do that thing of dancing around. What is it? I Dream of Jeannie with the brown hair or something. And then it's Freddie and Jeannie who are dancing like that. But then suddenly, or not suddenly, but very, very kind of quietly, Dickie comes in and cuts in, and then he starts dancing. And then we see Freddie sort of thrown off to the side there, and he starts, I dream of Jeannie with her long brown hair. And then you see a look on his face, and his face changes. He realizes that there is a sudden shift of the sexual dynamic between these three, or among these three. And perhaps he's sensing the fact that she and he, meaning Dickie, are creating a connection. So, and he's feeling jealous, of course, and so that spurs him on even more, right? And then that leads to all these little scenes of tension between, let's say, the two of them, and also the three of them, right? Because then it's Freddie who says, so. He asks her how much, right? Which is such a terrible sort of faux pas, and that really turns her gears, as it were. But it reveals the fact that they kind of know who she is. And so it acknowledges also, in a cutting way, the fact that this could all be fake on the part of her. Maybe this is just an act, this is just business as usual. Maybe Dickie would like to think it's not business, although I'm not quite sure. But my point here is that I think already we're having so many shifts in the dynamics among the characters, and this is just this one scene, that it's almost hard to keep up for me, right? Because, for instance, the two men, they're rivals, and then they're friends, and then they're trying to, Freddie's trying to play on his emotions and say, let's go back and remember how we were when we were younger, and we were having playing around with women all the time. And then Dickie says, it wasn't like that. So he's suddenly dashing all his dreams, and we realize that maybe Freddie is maybe misremembering the past, or maybe he's a liar or something. We're not sure, or maybe Dickie is a liar. We're not sure. We're not sure who to believe. Our sympathies probably go towards Dickie, John Marley, because he is the star of the film, and he is probably a face that we know well, and we've associated him for the very outset of the film, so because he's the first character we see when the film starts, and so maybe we associate with him more. But you're right. I think Dickie is a very complex character, and he's not all the way thoroughly likable. I don't think he's meant to be, though. I think we get a sense that he's a little bit of a liar. We get a sense of that perhaps during his conversation later with Jim McCarthy, right? When Jim McCarthy is trying to stake his ground, it's sort of he's trying to be the alpha male. And he's saying, I make this much money, and I'm a big shot here, but I think Dickie then stakes his own ground and says, I'm chairman of the board, and I know, right? Why am I forgetting the name? Was it Stewie Ray? Am I getting that detail right? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Well, yeah, he works for me. That sort of thing. So then Dickie tries to basically one-up him, and one-up him in terms of the alpha male competition. And it works, right? Because he gets them to leave. And just him and Jeannie, who's left. And then Jeannie says, right, it took them, she was waiting for them to leave. He couldn't wait for them to leave. And then it's just the two of them together. Well, you get a sense that perhaps he's not really telling the truth there, or he's at least, lying, or at least being liberal with his facts, as it were. Also, he does a lot of dancing, and also a lot of the characters do a lot of dancing and singing, which seems a little bit out of place. I think that can be explained kind of by the fact that they are drunk, although there's one sequence at the end when Dickie comes home, and he's driving home after, we assume, having spent the night with Jeannie. And he comes home, and he's all happy, and he's jumping around the house and stuff, and he sees Chet run off and jump down from the roof, and you've got that huge jump from the roof there. And so, and then Dickie, who is, I don't think, on any moral high ground to be able to say that, but he gets all angry at Maria for what he assumes to be their one night stand. He doesn't even understand the significance of the night that Maria had. As we understand, right? She tried to kill herself with the overdose of sleeping pills, and so he is not at all aware of this, and so he is very unsympathetic at that point. Also, by the fact that he doesn't have any, I think, moral high ground to stand on, by the very fact that we understand that he slept with Jeannie. So he too. They're still married too, so he had, a thing with Jeannie, and he's angry to Maria, or he's angry at Maria for doing the very same thing that he did. Of course, his anger has, I think, different roots as well. I think he's frustrated also by the fact that, I think, in the way that he sees it, he has been denied sex by Maria. But then he comes home and he sees that she has had, or he understands that she has had a one-night fling with this random guy. And so, he calls him a 10-year-old or something like that, very disparagingly, as he walks down the steps. But so I think his anger is a little bit more deeply rooted, rather than just being sort of upset, although I think being upset is part of it, or jealous as well as part of it. But my point here is that Dickie, I think, is very unlikable. And we can extend that to a lot of the characters. But what I'd like to suggest to you is this. These scenes where they're all like dancing around and doing things that seem really out of place, I would suggest that they are maybe do, or they can be helped. We can see these scenes through a number of ways. So the first way is perhaps the way that I think is the weakest, which is it's a way of looking at real life, a slice of real life, right? Because people act this way in real life. When they are drunk, when people have gone out, they've come home, right? The ladies, they've come home after they've been in this really intense nightclub, and they've met this really, this really like exciting guy, and they've brought him home, and then they're all excited, and it's like Dorothy Gulliver's character Flo, right? Florence, it's what she says is, you make me feel young again. Please kiss me. You make me feel like I love dancing. So it's like it's that feeling that they have. So they're still on a high, if you will, and they're trying to have some more fun in the night, as it were. And so maybe the way they're acting is just that's the way they are. And so it's a slice of reality, if you will. I don't really buy that argument fully because of what I was alluding to earlier, the fact that this isn't necessarily cinema verite style film. But I think that interpretation is still possible. Okay. Another way of looking at these scenes, these sort of maybe irreverent moments of character, is looking at them almost like trying to, I don't want to say regression, but trying to go back to their moments of youth and failing to do so, or having scenes of awkwardness and trying to do so. This is true for Freddie. He's dancing around. He's trying to recapture something of what he thinks is how Dickie and he acted when they were young. Dickie seems to have a little bit of a disagreement on that point, but that's very interesting. And also Flo is very much the same way. Also the other women, Billy May, to a lesser extent, Billy May, and as much as I think the character would disagree with me, Louise, right? Louise Draper, right? According to Billy May, she's the one who always tries to be all goody two-shoes, right? But it was actually she who wanted to dance with Chet first, and she was a little bit embarrassed in the middle there, but she was getting into it, and so. That is a suggestive to me of these characters acting like children. And the same is true for Jeannie, the same is true for Dickie, and the same is true also perhaps even for Maria, and the way she laughs all the time and just tries to, just laughing and laughing. And so this seems to suggest to me that maybe attempts, whether they be intentional or not, of these characters to go back, regress, try to recapture some essence of how they were when they were younger, teenagers, children. Why? Because they seem to think that those were the glory days, those are the days where they felt fun and alive, which is maybe suggestive perhaps of the interpretation that maybe they don't feel that way now. And also it's also a feeling, I think, that, I certainly have, not always, but from time to time. I don't go around dancing like that, but I do have a sense of wanting to act like a child. And I sometimes say things when no one's around, and I say certain words that are a bit childish. And I think that's part of the psychology that I feel in that moment is, for whatever reason, I just want to feel like a kid again, And I think a lot of it has to a lot of that is operating with most, if not all, the characters in the main characters in this film. So I can see those scenes as being them trying to go back and act like children, because maybe that was a happier time. Okay. Another way to look at those scenes is looking at them almost like kind of like what is the phrase? Like a primal scream. Okay, because what does that mean, primal scream? So it's this idea of letting out all this stuff that you've pent up, whether it be rage or stress or some kind of intense emotion, just letting out in some kind of physically exhaustive manner. It'd be screaming or shouting or some kind of movement of some kind. And I think what we see with many of these characters is that there is a lot pent up in them, a lot pent up in them for whatever reason. And we're never sure of the details, but I think, let's take again Dickie as an example. He is obviously very frustrated because for whatever reason, he is not feeling physically satisfied at home, because for whatever reason he feels like she is not willing to be with him. We realize later, in a moment of great intensity at the very end, she does say, right, I don't love you. Now, if that's true or not, I'm not sure. It's probably her real feeling, although I have a reading about that ending which I think is much more ambiguous. But let's say that's true. The fact, maybe let's assume that's true. And I think it is true that she indeed does not love him. Well, that explains in many ways the reason for his frustration. Now, we're not sure as to why she felt this way. And I think the shots of the two of them in bed, right, that flashback scene with the two of them in bed, I think is very symbolic, because we see them laughing and having fun and just laughing for whatever reason, telling jokes. And as the jokes go on and on, they kind of get cornier and cornier. And so that is a really clever scene in many ways, because it's such a great metaphor, and I think it captures the relationship so perfectly in whatever the scope of the however many minutes that is, right? Because you go from the very outset where they seem to be so much into each other and they're laughing, and then as the scene goes on, the more jokes he says, the kind of cornier they are. And so we as viewers, while we might have been with him at the start, kind of, okay, that's a funny joke, but I'm not really into it. And then at the very end, when they sort of turn away from each other, at least when she says, you're not funny or something, and then that's as brutal as a rejection almost. That is the perfect metaphorical way to show the coldness in their relationship. It's perfect. And so within the space of those few minutes, you see the de-evolution of their relationship in this metaphorical form, in the context of corny jokes. And so it's perfect. And so we realize that perhaps there's something innate in his character, in Dickie's character, that made her feel that way. At first, just like in that scene, maybe she felt she was really into him. But then as time progressed, his jokes got cornier and cornier, perhaps, and then she just had enough. The reason why I would give some room of ambiguity as to why I think maybe she might not necessarily have meant I don't love you at the end there. The reason why I think there's a little bit of room of ambiguity is simply because, remember after they had their little argument in the house earlier in the film, and then he comes down, there's that famous scene where he comes down from the pool room and she's fixing a drink or whatever, and they meet again. It's a beautifully staged scene. She's laughing and she says, haha, I'm sorry. As she says that, he says, I want a divorce. And they talk almost over each other. I find that scene to be so powerful because, I felt so bad for Maria. On the one hand, I feel bad for Maria because you think that maybe had she said I'm sorry a few minutes earlier, maybe this whole thing could have been avoided. Who knows? But I kind of hesitate there when I say I feel bad for Maria, because that means I'm saying that from the viewpoint of maybe this marriage, Dickie, is really good for Maria. But perhaps, if I take a step further back, maybe this marriage isn't really good for Maria at all, right? So it's so tough for me to figure out, which then would explain why she doesn't love him at all. So maybe she loves him, maybe she doesn't love him. Or maybe the fact that she says, I'm sorry, is not necessarily suggestive of the fact that she loves him, but more suggestive of the fact that she is in need of some kind of stability in her life in terms of what the marriage gives her. But then she says at the very end, in her own sort of primal scream, if you were, I don't like my life. And so that would totally destroy the interpretation that I'm trying to suggest here at this very moment, that she's seeking some kind of stability via her marriage, or maybe she doesn't know what she wants. I mean, that's another thing about marriage which is very interesting. I think I'm not a marriage counselor or anything like that, but there are always these things you hear, right, about like sometimes marriage, people get married because they love each other. Maybe that feeling might change over time. And then maybe people might feel like instead of wanting to divorce, they feel like maybe they're not into each other, but they think that the marriage holds some kind of stability or something, or maybe there's maybe the marriage is more stable than what one might have to face outside the marriage or something like that. So maybe that's where she is coming from. And my sense is that it's probably the latter rather than the former. But going back to my earlier comments that were addressing JR62's comments about how unlikable these characters are. And I think we can look at some of these scenes as a kind of primal scream of the characters. This is definitely true for Maria. I think this is true also for Dickie. This is true for Freddie. This is true for Jeannie. This is true for Louise, Billy May, Flo, Florence, Flo, of course, Dorothy Gulliver, who gives, I think, the most profoundly moving moments of the film in terms of how she's trying to come on to Chet. And I mean, I don't know. It's astounding just how like it's lovely. It's sad. It's sort of charming. It's almost pathetic, and to have all that there on the screen for everyone to see, I think takes just an incredible amount of bravery, and it's stunning, and it says a lot about society. It says a lot about me and how I look at that and how I react to that, and the kind of person and my own maybe weaknesses and failings as a human being, perhaps. But my point is that right, she is also, or her character is also a great example of this primal scream of the characters and trying to break out of something that they feel is otherwise a kind of malaise in their life, perhaps. But that's how I would see those scenes. And through that lens, or through those lenses anyway, I think for me the scenes work very well. Despite that, I don't think we're meant to like them all the way, right? We're not meant to like these characters all the time, because as I said, there are so many shifts in the dynamics among the characters. Sometimes they like each other, sometimes they're at war with each other, and it turns on a dime like that. The scenes between Maria and Dickie are an example. The scenes with Dickie and his first time at Jeannie's house and the second time at Jeannie's house. The scenes between him and Jeannie, I think, are just like that. And the scenes between Marie and Chet as well they're just shifting all the time, and so it's very difficult to keep one's allegiances steady. And I completely understand that. I feel the exact same way. I'm always I feel not upset, but I feel upset, right, in terms of being shifted off balance. So there is a sense of disequilibrium, perhaps, but I think that's the intended effect, because it comes down to the characters and who they are, rather than designing the characters in a way that will make them likable to the audience. Do you see what I mean? The point is the characters themselves, and whether they are likable or not, that is the byproduct of what they are. Okay, and I think for Cassavetes and crew, it's more important about what the characters are to them. If we like them, that's great. If not, that's just the way they are. So I hope I was making sense there, but if not, I apologize. But anyway, thank you very much for the great comment. And yes, anyone who has a maybe quote unquote negative comment, this is great. Okay, so JR62's comment is great. I really want to encourage those, and so no worries at all, because this is the kind of discussion I really love. So thank you very much for this. And also Paula too, I think you're expressing a little bit of maybe you found it difficult to get into and stuff. So I really think these are, and Wolfgratz as well. Fabrizio, hello. I'm so sad I couldn't rewatch this film today. For me, Cassavetes is the greatest director of all time. All of his films are essential, not only for cinephiles, but for mankind in general. It's a very, very eloquent way of putting it, my friend. Thank you. Sehofen, hello. Let's see. So I'm just going to skip around here a little bit. So if I skip over your comment, please forgive me. But let's just go forward here. Yes, so Paula, let me just, here, you're definitely not alone. I went through a range of emotions with this one. At times I liked it, and then other times I was sure I hated it. I even stopped it a few times because I couldn't take it. This is a lovely, lovely comment. This is great. This is actually not so dissimilar, my friend Paula. This is not dissimilar to how I view the film. Sometimes I really love it. Sometimes I hate the film. But I hate. Sometimes I really hate what I'm seeing. Really, really, I do. But I don't think I look at that as being a mark of a really engaging work of art. And I think, for instance, what are the moments I hate? The moment I hate the most is the scene where I alluded to at the end where Dickie comes home and he's all happy and dancing around. What was he expecting when he came home? I don't know. And he sees Chet run away, and he doesn't realize. Of course, I mean, I don't see how he could realize, but he doesn't realize that she's gone through. She almost died, and he's talking to her like that. I don't know what he was expecting. And when I see that moment, I really hate Dickie in that moment. I really do. But I think the film that engenders that kind of response in me must be doing something right. And so, yeah, this is it creates a kind of reaction in me, and this true. It's not just Cassavetes that does this. Many other filmmakers have been able to do this, but this film in particular does this to me in a way that I think is really great. And that's also something that's very interesting about a film. What's the difference between really appreciating a film as operating on you in a way that is like pushing your buttons versus liking a film and therefore having to like a film as being a prerequisite for considering a film to being, you know what I mean? For me, I know people are different for different reasons. I'm very open to hearing other people's approaches. Don't get me wrong, but for me personally, I always think that there is something to be said about watching the film, not liking the atmosphere in the film, not liking the characters in the film, but that itself pushes a button in me somewhere because it's like life. I meet people, right, wherever. I don't like everyone that I meet, so I like a lot of people. I don't like a lot of people. It's just the way that my human character makeup is, I suppose. And so it feels like an extension of that. It feels like I'm experiencing real life, as it were, real life in air quotes. But I think hopefully I'm making myself clear. In other words, it feels like something that is an extension of how I would feel engaging with humanity on the micro scale. And so in that sense, I respect this work very much, and I really love this work very much because it does push certain buttons in me. They're not all negative. I think it's positive and negative, but I think something that is all positive isn't necessarily giving me the fullness of the human life experience, as it were. Something that is more mixed, I think, is more realistic for me. And therefore, for that reason, I really get into this film very much, very, very much. And so maybe that's what our dear friend Fabrizio is trying to get at in terms of why he used the word essential. But in any event, but right, everyone has his or her own different approach. And so with that token, my friends, I completely get if someone does not engage with this film as much. I completely get that, and I respect that 1000%. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. Sahil SPST. Hi, hello. Paula Mora, hello. Battle J Royale, hello. Greetings from Belgium. Hello, Battle J Royale. Hello, thank you very much. I think you just left a comment about what was it, the Masters of Cinema video that I did some time back. So thank you very much for that. I haven't responded yet, but I will try to respond later in the week. So thank you very much. Let's see. Okay, just going through the comments here. If I skip your comment, I apologize. I'm just doing the best that I can. Oh gosh. There is a discussion here about other Cassavetes' works that I think has been, in large part, encouraged by our dear friend Fabrizio. So thank you. I see a discussion of shadows, which is great. I just see a discussion of a woman under the influence, which I think is great. Jenna Rowland's performance in that latter film, of course. Paula says, I found the way it's shot interesting. It made for a strange voyeuristic effect. That's interesting. A strange voyeuristic effect. Could be. Yes, it could be. That's a very interesting take. Voyeurism. I never really thought about this film in the context of voyeurism, but the more I think about it, the more I think you have something there, Paula, because we're trying to see these characters in their most intimate moments, right? The moments that they wouldn't want to show anyone else. I think perhaps the ultimate example of that would be what happens at the end with Maria. And I mean, she is just, right? I mean, what happens to her, and how, right, when she comes out of it, she's just, I mean, it's a very, I mean, I think she alludes to this as well. It's a very embarrassing moment in many ways. And Lynn Carlin mentioned that in the Criterion documentary. So in that sense, we are privy to these very embarrassing moments of characters. And so, yes, voyeurism, I think, might have something to do with that. That's a very interesting take, Paula. I had to think about that some more. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, just skipping around here. Again, if I skip your comment, I apologize. Yes, I'm just trying to limit my responses to comments about faces. So I know I'm seeing a couple comments asking me about other films. So I really appreciate it, my friends. But I just want to focus on faces. So if I haven't addressed your question in this live stream, if you want to ask it to me later or another video, please feel free to do so. I really just ask it to me again, and just please remind me, and I'll do my best to respond. But I just want to focus on faces here for a second. Let's see. Although please, that you can always talk about anything you want in the chat. That's not a problem with me. I don't want to stop anyone from chatting about anything they want. So let's see. Wow, this is great. Great. Fabrizio is doing... oh, there's some great dialogue here. Great. Wow, wonderful. Yes, someone's asking, Dan White, what are your thoughts on love streams? Yes, I do want to focus on faces, of course, so I don't want to talk too much about love streams, but Love Streams was a film that I didn't like at all at first, but I actually came around to it quite dramatically and quite positively, very, very positively. Let's see. Okay, just scrolling down some more. Okay. GR62 says, can't imagine watching this for 3 hours. Yes, you're talking about faces, and I think you're alluding to the 3-hour plus cut of this film. You know, it's a good point, but you know, according to the documentary, the reaction in Toronto and I think they were talking about Toronto, but the reaction, you know, according to Al Rubin and Seymour Cassell, the reaction in Toronto was really quite positive, and it had a great reception in overseas, in Europe as well. And so, right, it's just but also there was Al Rubin was talking about how people, when it was shown, I think it was in Venice. He's saying about how it was shown in Venice. I mean, it won awards, but also people were walking out of the theater. Probably, according to Al Rubin, was probably due, at least in some respect, to the fact that the film wasn't subtitled or wasn't prepared in a dubbed Italian version at the time. So maybe he was opining that it might have been due to the fact that some people might not have been understanding what was going on. So he's saying, this is like, I don't, yeah. So is making reference to the sound of the large doors that open in theaters, and that was the indication of people leaving the theater. Although it did go on to find a lot of critical success, as far as I understand it. Let's see. Okay. Okay, let's see. There is discussion here. Okay, I'm just scrolling through the discussion here. I think, let's see. There's a discussion here about, okay, Wolfrat says, I think the initial drunk scene was well done, but it did seem to go on for ages. It got to the point where I was worried we weren't going to escape. Yes, that's a good point. The initial drunk scene, so this is the scene between Freddy and Dickie and Jeannie. I think that's what you're assuming, you're referring to. So, let's see. I haven't even gotten to Chet yet, which I want to get to in a second here before I run out of time, but... Sahil SPST says, another way of looking at faces is that it's like persona, but the philosophical way of talking is replaced with a funny style of hyper-energetic crudeness. Bergman is also mentioned in the beginning. Yes, Bergman is also mentioned because that's the film, or not the film, but Maria, when Dickie comes home, Maria says, can you take me to a Bergman film? And then Dickie rejects that by saying, I don't want to feel depressed, or something like that. So, I don't think they mention the title, though. If I'm mistaken, please forgive me, but I don't think they mentioned the title. It's 1968 or it was made in the mid 60s, and there was a number of years when it was being made, but it was made in the mid 60s, I assume. So I don't know, but anyway. Bergman is mentioned, and it's interesting how you talk about this thing about funny style of hyper-energetic crudeness. This could be a reflection of John Cassavetes as the way he acted. There's a great anecdote in the Criterion documentary given by Al Rubin, Seymour Cassell, and others about how John Cassavetes would be laughing a lot. He would just be laughing on set a lot, and the way he laughed was like this, according to Al Rubin anyway. He tried to suppress his laughter because he was laughing during the filming, and so he tried to suppress his laughter because he was behind camera and he didn't want to spoil the scene. So he would have this habit of like pinching his nose and going like this, right? I'm crudely reenacting it, but that's my impression of what these people are describing the way John Cassavetes laughed. And John Cassavetes tended to laugh at humorous moments, and he also laughed at very intense moments, and he laughed at moments where you'd think it would be inappropriate to laugh, but he was just laughing. And I think it was because that was the way he expressed himself. When he was excited, he was giddy, he knew that they were onto something, that he was catching lightning in a bottle, as it were. And so when he was excited or having fun or having a good time, feeling the moment, as it were, that's when he would be laughing like this. And so in that anecdotal, indirect way, perhaps, I can kind of start to see what you're getting at here, Sahil SPST, when you're talking about this comparison. And I can see the reasoning behind that. Excuse me. I would perhaps temper my agreement with that statement, with that quoted statement, by saying, I'm not sure if all of the moments of all the moments of energetic, let's say, I don't want to call it crudeness, but let's call it just laughing around, fooling around, just mucking about, just being kind of this dancing around, drunk, all this stuff. Those moments of playing around. Let me put it that way. I think a lot of it leads to something much deeper, but also it can be seen as being a cover, a way by which people tend to avoid those philosophical questions. In other words, they deny those moments, but at the same time, those moments are used to enlighten further the moments among characters. And what do I mean by that? I think the prime example of this is, and I've alluded to it before, the bit where the Freddy and Jeannie and well, it's first Freddy and Jeannie, but they're doing the thing with "I Dream of Jeannie" with the long brown hair. That seems to be quite a meaningless moment. And it seems to be, on the one hand, an avoidance of what might otherwise be considered to be the elephant in the room, mainly the fact that maybe Jeannie is expecting to be paid for this. Okay. Also, right, so it might be seen as being avoiding the issue on the one hand. On the other hand, it goes directly to a quote-unquote philosophical moment, or a very existential moment, or not existential, but let's say a deep psychological moment among the three of them, because it's at that moment that Dickie intervenes and cuts in, and he sort of stakes his ground. And I think it's at that moment that you see the look on Freddy's face, and he realizes that he's lost. He's lost at that. He'll try to keep soldiering on throughout the rest of that sequence, but I think that's the moment where he's lost. So that's such a profound moment to me, because it at once avoids the issue, but at the same time it gets at the heart of the issue among these the human dynamic among these three characters. And so I would temper my comments slightly like that. But I really love this comment, Sahil SBSD, that the comparison to Bergman as well is very interesting. Excuse me here, just scrolling through. Okay. And let's see. There's talk about Oscars, Academy Awards. Of course, this film did have Academy Award attention at the time. And Paula says, I love the lady who played Maria. So Lynn Carlin, the actress who played Maria. I thought she was wonderful in this. I kept noting her facial expressions. It was a subtle performance in many ways. Yes, her facial expressions are great. I love the way the camera zoomed in and out as well, in particular with her character. Let's talk about Maria. This is good. I'll get to the rest of the comments in a moment, but Paula reminds me of something that I wanted to talk about with Maria, in particular Maria and Chet. And it gets to another thing which I think is really fascinating about this film, for me anyway, which is that's okay. There's the very famous and very, very uncomfortable scene between Chet and Maria, right? This is after all the women have gone. And first it's Louise, then it's Betty May, and then it's Florence and Chet. And Florence and Chet wants to take Florence home. And then they leave Maria alone in the house. And then she's going around in the house, turning out the lights or something like that. And then we see her in the dark, her profile in the dark, which is such a key and beautiful moment, right? Because there's a moment where you see, we don't know what she's looking at. And she's alone in the dark, or at least we think she's alone in the dark, and it's her profile. What is she thinking? She could be thinking anything. It's basically what we see as viewers in her face. And it's only seconds later do we realize that Chet has returned. And that's what she was looking at. And then she starts to laugh, and they just fool around a little bit, and then they stop, and they just become intimate. That is such a great turn, if you will. It's a kind of nice trick that I think Cassavetes plays on me, and it then leads into excuse me. Let me just take one sip of water. Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm sorry about that. What was I saying? So Chet and Maria, pardon me for my interruption there. It then leads to them, we assume, going to bed with each other. Then it cuts, I think, to the sequence between Nikki and Jeannie. But then after that, we go to the morning, and we don't get any. We don't get any scenes of her imbibing anything. We just suddenly see the room. It's a bathroom, I think. Chet storming out of it, and then we see her on the floor, unconscious. We don't know what happened, but something terrible's happened. And so then we see the sequence where Chet goes down, tries to do something, tries to help her, tries to save her life. All to the point trying to get whatever it was that she imbibed out of her system in a very graphic way. According to Lynn Carlin in the documentary, he actually put, Seymour Cassel actually put his fingers down her mouth in order to, it was the idea of getting her to get this stuff out and to save her life. And and there is the moment where he starts to slap her and hit her. And then he says, and then she starts to come around, and then we see the brilliant. I say brilliant. I don't mean brilliant in the sense of the scene, but I mean brilliant in terms of acting. That profoundly brilliant acting moment of her and the tear, the sort of the mascara stained tear, perhaps. That strolls down the side of her face right there. Maybe it's this side, I remember, but it's the right hand portion of her face. And then he says, oh, crying, great, more crying, right? Tears are happiness. This, and that brings her about, right? And that leads to her basically coming back to life. That moment, I can't tell you enough how brilliant I think that moment is in this film. The level of contradiction that is on display here is remarkable, and it shows the heart of the complexity of human emotion. Now, let me be specific. For instance, there are two instances in particular where Chet is expressing kind of a human feeling that I think can be directly seen as being quite negative or antithetical to trying to achieve a human connection. One, he's hitting her, he's slapping her. Now this on its face would seem to be a very violent act, right? It would be an act that would be suggestive of one person not liking another person. And it's manifesting itself through a physical act of slapping. And it's quite violent and vicious. But he is doing it to save her life. Okay, so there is a contradiction. There's contradiction number one. Contradiction number two comes when she cries and she gives that tear. And he says, oh, that's great, cry. Tears are happiness. So there is a contradiction that is inherent there. But I think it is... I don't know if the word contradiction does it justice, right? Because he is expressing this joy in her crying. Now, on the one hand, right, crying and sadness can be seen as being something that one might want to avoid, because these are dealing with feelings of maybe emotional distress or negativity or something along those lines. Maybe these aren't feelings that are very comfortable for us to express. So it seems a little bit odd for that feeling to be associated with maybe something that seems to be on the polar opposite end of the spectrum, namely happiness. Right? Tears are life, right? Crying is life. Tears are happiness. And so, but I find that contradiction to be utterly fascinating. And I say that I think the word contradiction doesn't do it justice, because I don't think it's a contradiction at all. Because I think, right, it's like he is doing, for the slapping is just, essentially, you get a slap, right? And it's a violent thing. It's something that one shouldn't do, right? But it's a slap that occurs, and it awakens something, and it's a shock to the system. Well, sometimes one needs shocks to one's system in order to awaken something. Now, granted, I mean, this is a very extreme instance and hitting someone, using violent acts or an extreme situation, don't get me wrong. This is in no way endorsing slapping someone else, right? But my point here is that the violent act of a slap or of, the physical altercation, if you will, is in itself meant to be an act of reviving or awakening, which I think is complex and very, very shocking and jarring, but also quite a profound moment, especially considering the fact that this is life or death for Maria. Also with the crying, this is very key for me too, because it's almost like she has, throughout the film, almost denied herself, or us anyway, a sense of actual showing of an outpouring of emotion until now, at this moment where she just gives forth everything. Now, it's through this terrible traumatic moment, of course, but I think the in terms of a narrative metaphorical moment, I'm not talking about the realistic or the real life implications of this terrible moment of attempt of suicide. I'm talking about the way it works in the narrative. The way it works in the narrative here is that there's an outpouring of emotion that leads to life. Now, it is crying, it is sadness, but, right, the word happiness here, I think, is a stand-in for the word life. So emotions become life. And I think that is the perfect way of looking at the way in which Cassavetes is allowing his actors to work in this space, right? To sort of express themselves and to explode in sort of these weird ways when they're in the drunk scenes, but also in these profoundly deep ways with Ched and Maria as well. And they might seem contradictory, but I think the more one thinks, or at least the more I think about the contradiction, the more I think there is less of a contradiction and more of a nuanced, subtle, and very deep and profound expression of a real human emotion going on here. The same is true also for the moments between Jeannie and Dickie. When Jeannie comes to him and when they're alone together, and she says, he calls him an SOB, and he says, she says, you do something to me, and then he responds by saying, you kill me, right? You kill me, or something to that effect. If I'm mistaking the lines, I apologize. But my point is, these are words that I think on paper look very strange if they're said to be words that are used in moments of intimacy between two characters, right? Because this is the moment where they're basically expressing whatever feelings that they have for each other to each other. He doesn't say, I love you, or I'm really into you. And she says, she basically insults him, in a playful way, of course, but she insults him. He says, you're an SOB. And he says to her, you kill me. Right? This is to be the ultimate moment of intimacy between these two characters. But they use words that seem to be out of place, or they seem to be antagonizing words. So there is another contradiction there as well. But I think it's also not contradictory if one thinks of not only the loving, beautiful feelings that one might have in moments of intimacy, but also there are stark implications in the union between these two people. Whatever reason that may be based on their own personal baggage, their personal history, what the implications might be for their existing relationships around them, whether they be positive or negative. And believe me, there are always positive implications, but there are also negative implications. And I think we have a moment of intimacy where they use words of antagonism or antagonizing words. I think that captures that level of nuance in a very sophisticated way. And it says in that microcosm of a moment that the moment between these two people is at once beautiful and loving, is also potentially very destructive. So, or maybe some kind of shade of nuance between that. So, I think that is another way of showing a kind of, what is it? On the one hand, they might seem on its face to be contradictory elements merging to find very key moments in the film. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that they are not so much contradictory as much as they are really getting at something direct about a complicated aspect, but interesting facet of human nature. So I did want to bring that up before I forget. So anyway, thank you very much, Paula, for reminding me about that in the context of Maria. Oh, and before I forget also, because it's almost 8 o'clock and I have to walk my dog soon, but the film is not without its sense of ambiguity. I think there's a lot of ambiguity here as well. I mentioned earlier my feelings of ambiguity about, does Maria really feel that way when she says, "I don't love you, Dickie"? I think she does, but I think there's room for doubt. I think the most profoundly poetic moment of ambiguity comes at the very end. And it's the question of, do you think that Dickie and Maria will stay married after the end credits? At first I thought there's no hope for them. There's no hope for them after this. But I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. And I think it's shown so poetically in those final moments with the staircase. We've already seen Dickie come home after what we assume to be his night spent with Jeannie. He comes home. Remember, he said earlier in the night, he said, I'm not never coming back. I'll call for my things. Right? So the implication was that in the heat of the moment, he was saying he would not come back. But in fact, we see him later in the film. He actually comes back. So he's already contradicting himself. But that might be suggestive of the fact that he really had no intent to divorce, or maybe he did, but he no longer does. Who knows? But in any event, we can assume, or at least I can assume, that there is a sense of him maybe wanting to get back to Maria, or maybe things going back to normal, or the way things were. And he comes back and he sees Chet, and all that stuff ensues, which I talked about earlier. And then we go to the very end with the two of them on the staircase there. Dickie on the lower end of the staircase at first, and then Maria at the top end, and their cigarette, and throws him. He has a lighter. He throws. He doesn't light the cigarette first. He throws her the lighter first, and then she lights her cigarette, and then he asks for the lighter back because he has to light his cigarette. I think that's a very interesting moment. He could have lit his cigarette first, but he gives her the lighter first. I think that's a subtle way of suggesting that perhaps he has some feeling for her, and maybe there is. That's an indication that he wants the marriage to go on. I'm not sure, but there are some ambiguities there as well. You go back to a shot of them and the staircase, which lingers until the end of the film, of course, where I think it's right. They're trying to follow each other. Right, one character leaves, and then one character seems to follow and comes back. They don't come together. They just walk over each other. Maybe there's a sense one tries to meet another, they don't. They go to one room, change. She goes to one room, change. They come back, sit down. Maybe they try to go to the same place, but then they drift apart. One goes up, the other goes down, and that's it. And I think there is a profound poetry there, because on the one hand, we realize after all the events of that sequence up to the explosion of the realization of what Maria feels, right, and all that stuff happens. They're just almost spent of energy, as it were, and then they're just sitting there, almost not knowing what to do, and they almost go into a routine of going to changing, going to one room, leaving another, and it really creates the space. But they never meet. They never meet. They're always moving, and then they're sitting down and in stationary in separate places, or they're moving and they're not in sync with each other. But it's almost like the space is providing an excuse for them to move around and to walk around, and it creates the rhythm and the habits of marriage, which suggests to me the possibility that maybe this is a metaphor for them going back to their routine of moving about, one person going one way, the other person going another way. They tend to cross paths once in a while, but they never stop and acknowledge each other necessarily. But that's the way that we assume that their marriage has been, at least in the most recent period of time. And so there are moments of maybe connection, and I think profoundly that comes with the lighter and the cigarettes. But whether that is an indication of them gonna divorce or not, I'm not sure. And I don't think they will. The more I think about it, I think they will stay together. Maybe it's going to be a loveless marriage. Maybe Dickie will continue his frustration and his bad jokes and the like, and Maria will still ask him to take her to a Bergman movie or something like that, and they'll go through the routine. But maybe things won't change. Whether that's good or bad, that's up to you, the viewer, to decide. I have my own feelings about whether it's good or bad based on what I've seen in the film. But I think there is a lovely room for interpretation based on the ambiguity that's provided by these very poetic images. And the way, and that ends the film with the lovely music that overlays it. And so and the fact that the film ends on this very ambiguous note, very poetic note, stairway. I mean, we started the film, I think, with stairways, or Dickie walking down steps. I think, and we end with shot on the steps. So there's a nice bookend fashion to this film with the image of the stairways. But also, it's nice to see the stairway because, you know, the idea of people walking past each other, sitting on one end or sitting on the other, never meeting, never stopping to say hello. If they are indeed not to divorce and they're going to stay together and be married, wow, what a profound way to end the film in terms of this powerful metaphorical image of a marriage. And that is Faces. And that is the way Faces ends. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention because I thought it was just lovely. Just haunting. Absolutely haunting. But anyway, let's see. Excuse me while I revisit the chat here. Sorry for just going off like this, but I just... Oh, gosh. This film really does something to me. So, and it's almost 8 o'clock. I can't believe... Gosh, has it been almost 2 hours already? Time flies when you're having fun. Really, really it does. Okay, so let's see here. JR62 says, good points, Daisuke. Thank you. The emotions expressed in the film were good. Cassavetes probably intended the reaction. Paul says, yes, I think it's definitely a film that is supposed to make you squirm to some extent. You're meant to feel uncomfortable. I agree. Fabricio says, these kinds of films are the greatest. I just don't like the atmosphere of Gene. Jean Dielman, is that what you're referring to? Okay, it's hard, but it's so. I think you're referring to the fact that sometimes a film is difficult to watch, but becomes incredibly rewarding as a film cinematic experience. I agree with you 1000%, and I think there's a discussion here. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Okay, and let's see here. So Wolfgat says, meanwhile, I'm glad Daisuke has now got the song right. I wonder what song that was. Was it I Dream of Jeannie? I think I got the, yeah. Let's see. Okay. Let's see, just scrolling down the chat. Salhil SPST asks, was Faces one of your earliest encounters with Cassavetes? If this question is directed towards me, the answer is yes. It was one of the earlier ones that I saw, and it was one of the... I took to it almost immediately. I did have difficulty with it, undoubtedly, but I did take to it almost immediately compared with his other works. Da Jambo 1, I hope I got the pronounced correct. Following this channel really came together. Literally just saw this film for the first time a couple days ago. Oh, great, thank you. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for joining. I really appreciate it, and I hope the film was a rewarding experience for you. Yeah, and Paula says, yes, the ending stairway scene left it open. I did love that. My feeling is that they will stay together even though they probably shouldn't. Yes, that you say it so, Paula, you have such a great way with words. You say exactly what I want to say and just say it so much more succinctly and 100 times better than I could ever dream to say. So thank you, Paula. I should pay you. You should... gosh, you should write stuff for me to say because you say exactly what I want to say in such a better way all the time. Let's see. Sahel SPST says, the casual feeling of the ending gives me the feeling that this has happened more than once. Oh, that is such a great moment. And that they have been on the fringes of marriage for some time now. That is such a great, I didn't think of that until you said, this could be, you're right. Maybe, yes, the fact that they seem to be so much more, it's like a routine, that maybe this isn't the first time this has happened. Oh gosh, I mean, she does say to him, I don't love you, and his face does register a certain shock. At least I read a certain shock to it. So maybe that moment of realization was maybe the moment where he realizes why he thinks that she has been denying him sex. Oh gosh, that is an interesting comment. I have to think about that some more. That could be it. I'm not sure, but that could be it. Although maybe not, because he does register a lot of shock. And why would he register shock if they have been having arguments like this in the past, right? If they haven't, if this is the first time they're having a real big argument, that would explain why he's feeling the way he does. But he does go to the option of I want a divorce rather quickly, doesn't he? And so that also could be suggestive of the fact that maybe this isn't the first time they've had an argument. So this is a very interesting comment. I think, wow, that is great. That is really great. What is definitely true, though, is that this isn't a relationship that we see, in like they are in the throes of sort of a romantic courtship or anything. We never see those moments in the film. We see a certain stage of their life, and so maybe we can assume a lot of stuff has happened over the course of however many. I think Dickie mentions the word 14 years, and so, or the phrase 14 years, and so I think we can assume that they've been married for that long, although I'm not sure. We also, of course, a lot can happen if indeed it's 14 years. A lot can happen in 14 years, or whatever the amount of years, which I think we can assume can be a long time. But that's pretty another interesting question too. How long have they been married? The question of where did they meet? There seems to be a little bit of an age difference between Richard and Maria, although I'm not sure. But in any event, so what were the circumstances of them coming together, and all that? And I think all that becomes the story that we can begin to assemble in our minds. And I think part of that, the most important component of that, is what Sahil SPST is alluding to. Is maybe this isn't the first time that they've come to the brink, as it were. So what a great comment. I love that. That is really great. Thank you so much. Paula says, then going by everything we saw, to me it seems like they're likely to continue on the self-destructive path they're on. I couldn't agree more. Yes, you are right about that, I think. And then let's see. Wolfgrat says, my strong advice is for Maria to dump him, but there we are. Yeah. Yeah, that is such a like it's the moment that Dickie comes home. He it's all because Chet was there, or he sees Chet running, that he feels morally superior, or Dickie feels morally superior. And oh gosh, had Chet not been there, I think there would have been more chance for the two of them, Maria and Dickie, maybe to have had a real sincere conversation with each other. But I think the fact that Chet was there really riled him up. Riled Dickie up to a way that they couldn't connect. Maria and Dickie couldn't connect in a way. So there's all this stuff as well about chance and circumstance as well. And I alluded to that as earlier in this conversation about that profound moment where he says, I want a divorce, and she says, I'm sorry, over each other. And maybe had she said, I'm sorry, just a few minutes earlier, she could have avoided all this. But let's see. Let's see here. And okay. Although there were small glimpses where you felt maybe she was making some realizations. Yes. 62, hello. Nice to see you. And Dad Jumbo one says, I really loved it. So this is, you said you saw it just a couple days ago. First Cassavetes film I've seen as well. Wow. Awesome hearing some of this discussion as well. Well, thank you very much for joining, Dad Jumbo. And it's my honor and distinct privilege and pleasure to be able to have discussed this film with you upon your first watch of this, your first Cassavetes film. That is really great. Yes, and Dickie, and you continue. Dickie reprimanding her after she nearly died was soul crushing to me. Yes, yes, that is the moment where I hated him so much. I really hated him. It's not like I didn't fully understand what he was feeling, but at the same time, you're right. Gosh, if there was a moment, if there was a moment not to be morally superior, oh man, that was you don't do that. You just don't do that, man. He lost me at that moment right there, to be perfectly honest. And he was on tenuous ground with me throughout. I must be perfectly honest. But that's great. I mean, I wasn't looking to this film to create a character in Dickie that I would root for. So, what I love about that moment too is that his reaction is not wholly, it's not wholly foreign. In other words, it's not like he is doing it randomly. There is some basis for his reaction. There is some emotional basis for reaction, which I think is really admirable on the part of Cassavetes and crew and what they've created in this world they've created in Faces. But there we are. So like it or not, there's Faces. So yes, Jared says here, there's a part of me that wants there to be something positive at the end of the film, and that they could possibly fix their marriage at the end, while I also feel their marriage could be over. Yes. And if that isn't a profound take on marriage, Cassavetes' take on marriage, and I don't know what is. And so it's just a great. I mean, there's so many great moments. Like to talk about like a film like this, talking about these characters at this age, this stage in their lives. I go back to the Dorothy Gulliver Florence character, but to have a scene of her and like. Expressing her feelings, her sexual frustrations, and wanting to kiss a younger man. These sort of things. You don't see these in films, and it's in many ways it's heartbreaking to see it to see these characters go through these emotional. This emotional turmoil, as it were, but at the same time, to see this kind of outlook on life, I think is very refreshing, and that's another aspect that I didn't really go into as much, but let me just try to get into it now as an ending, which is, I think this film shows a different slice of life that is different from, let's say, the types of films where, let's say, modern blockbuster films or anything, where we see characters of a certain age bracket and in certain situations dealing with various character arcs and the like. Well, I think we can all agree that Faces presents a slice of life that we don't necessarily see in these sorts of narrative films. Granted, this is an independent film. This is a very independent film in that it was all, I understand it, most, if not all of the money came from John Cassavetes and Jenna Rollins, and so this is independent as anything. So maybe that could explain the fact that they are trying to deal with subject matter that would otherwise maybe not necessarily be the topic of discussion in, let's say, a Hollywood film at the time. And so I think that alone is to be something that is applauded, and it leads to more questions than answers, I think. Sometimes the answers to those questions, at least for me, can help me learn something about myself. Maybe it sheds light on some aspects of my own character that perhaps I'm not too happy about. I'm ashamed to admit that I have, perhaps. But that's all good in the context of films, right? Because that's what I think a good film is meant to do, or it should do. It really should push one around and really, as I said before, upset one's apple cart, so that hopefully one comes out of it slightly better in the long run. But who knows? Who knows? But to each his or her own, as it were. And that's another great thing about cinema, right? We can all have different approaches to different films and different takes. And we can all come together and discuss. So anyway, my friends, I have to wind this down because it's past 8 and my dog must go for a walk. So let me just, I can stay with you for another few minutes or so, and then I will leave you. So thank you very much for joining, my dear friends. It was a real pleasure to talk about this film with you, and I hope you enjoyed it. And once again, please note that these live streams are hopefully they're just the start of conversations. They don't have to be the end of conversations. I hope they're not the end. As soon as I turn this off, I hope the conversations between you and among you will continue. And that would make me very happy indeed. Also, if any of you out there are interested in your own live streams, in your own YouTube channels, you should do it. You should do live streams. You know, it's fun to do these live streams and talk about films with you. So likewise, if you ever do live streams and you want to talk about films, please let me know. Please invite me, and I'd love to join if I can. Sometimes I can't, or many times I can't because of the time difference. I'm in Tokyo, remember, so sometimes I'm sleeping when some live streams are going on. So I apologize. I don't mean to not participate, but if it's done in a time that I'm able to participate, I would love to join in and be part of the live chat. So if any of you ever have any live stream ambitions or plans, please let me know, and I will definitely consider them at the very least. If not, actually, I'll try to participate as best as I can. Finally, my friends, or not finally, there's a lot I should say, but I really want to encourage you out there. If you have YouTube channels, you can start talking about films that you like. I know some people have approached me over the past few months, asking me for advice about YouTube channels and should I start a YouTube channel. And I really appreciate it. I'm not anyone special. I'm just, as I said, I'm just very, very fortunate to have met a number of really nice people online, and I've just received a lot of support. But I don't do anything that special. All I do is just sit and I just talk about a film I've seen. And so I would encourage many of you out there. You have so many more intelligent comments to make about films than I could ever hope to make. And so, and I've seen so many great comments just today in the course of this past 2 hours or so, just seen so many comments that are just so on point, much more on point than I could ever hope to be. And so this is my way of encouraging you, if you are interested, to just try, if you are interested in blogging or podcasting or YouTube videos or something like that, or just writing or more letterboxed or something, go for it. Go for it. The more activity, the better, I say. For example, if any of you are having your own YouTube channels about films or anything like that, as I always say, you can leave your links to your channels in the comment section below. I will never delete them. I don't feel offended by that at all. On the contrary, I feel very happy to be able to say I play a little part in this grander, greater community of film fans online across the world. And so if I'm able to play a little part in that, if you're able to permit me to play a little part in your activity, then I would be very happy. It would be my honor. So that's just my opening sort of salvo, perhaps, or just my way of trying to say, go forth. The more voices out there, the better, I say. And you guys can do way more better than I could ever hope to do. So just go for it, and please enjoy yourself, have fun. Okay, so let's end it there. And oh gosh, I always forget this. I always forget this part. You know, someone said, well, I'll save that for later. But the October, what were the dates? It was the last 2 Sundays in October, right? I should forget. I'm so bad at this. But the last 2 Sundays in October are the next live stream. So that second to last Sunday is Kwaidan, and the last Sunday is the poll, right? So I haven't seen the poll in a few days, so I don't know what the leader is at the moment. The last time I saw it was, I think I want to say Night of the Living Dead was ahead, although I'm not sure. Okay, so let me just take a look here. If you haven't voted in the poll, please go to, okay, so I'm seeing it right now. So Night of the Living Dead is at 25%, with Don't Look Now, 23%. And then Videodrome at 20%, and then The Vanishing 15%, and Eyes Without Fate 18%. So it's still close. It's what, 286 votes. So if you haven't voted in the poll, please vote for which film you would like to discuss at that last Sunday in October. And that's very close to Halloween, which is why I chose the films I did. All of the films are a little bit disturbing, and so perhaps I understand that disturbing films aren't everyone's cup of tea. So if if none of these films is for you, I really apologize. It's not my intention to alienate you in any way. It's just, I just thought, in just the spirit of the season, we can talk about one of these films. You don't have to watch the live stream if you don't want to. So I'm trying to be as varied as I can in terms of content on this, content of the videos that I put on this YouTube channel. But I do like all of these films, and it would be my pleasure to talk to you about one of them at the last Sunday of October 2019. So if you haven't voted in the poll, please go to the community tab and please vote. I would love to hear your input. So there's that. Okay, my friends, so that's it. So thank you very much for joining me, and it was my pleasure as always. And with that, I hope you are happy and healthy and well. And oh gosh, I forgot. This week, more John Carpenter videos will be coming, I hope, and more what do you call it? Out One videos will be up. So that would be excuse me. That would be hold on. Excuse me. Okay, so that would be my pleasure to talk to you about, and so oh gosh, and so sorry about that. I think something fell. Oh. Sorry about that. Just was distracted. Something fell. And I realized it was this, which is an egg timer, but I've never seen this egg timer before, so it's probably, maybe this is, maybe my daughter's. I'm not sure. I've never seen this. But anyway, I'm sorry about that. I'm just completely distracted. But in any event, what was I saying? Oh, yes, so Out One. Yes, Out One videos will be up hopefully very soon. I'm sorry I made two and then I got lost in the shuffle because I was trying to figure out the other things with this. And so I'm just trying to work as fast as I can. So I apologize for my slow speed as always, but I hope you can understand. And just most importantly, my friends, just be well, enjoy yourselves, and have just watch a lot of films and keep the discussions alive and going. It's always my pleasure to be a part of them. So with that, my friends, be well, and I will talk to you very soon. So cheers. And with that, we're done. So thank you. So I'm just going to shut down, and I hope you were a, yes, probably from a board game, although I'm not sure which board game. We have a number of board games here, Wolfgratz, but I must admit, I've never seen this. Gosh, I'll have to ask my kids if they've seen this, because, I like, these sorts of, I always found these to be fascinating. You just watch, I always love to, turn them and just watch the sand go through. I love that. I thought this was the coolest thing as a kid, and I still do. I think it's really fascinating. But so I would remember this if I'd seen it, but I've never seen this before. So, anyway, it's funny things. Anyway, let's see. Oh, all things film. Yes, I missed you. I hope you're well. And I didn't. I didn't ask you, but I wonder what you thought about what is that Kurosawa film, like Kiyoshi Kurosawa film. But maybe I'll talk to you afterwards. But all right, my friends, thank you and cheers. All right, so that's the light is off, and let's see. The camera is still on, so I'm not going to say anything inflammatory, lest I offend anyone. So, yep. All right, so I hope you guys are well, and cheers. See you soon, my friends. And it's not off.